Pretty big crowd this morning. That's good. George, even you're here today. Welcome. Anyway, you all ready? Today, the May revision is being released. For the first time in more than a decade, we've got a balanced budget, and it's solid. We have money to invest in education because of Proposition 30. During the campaign, the critics said two things. Proposition 30 can't pass, and if it does, the money won't go to schools. Well, they were wrong on both accounts. We've got more money because the people voted for it, and most of that money is going to our schools that need it very much. It's going to the schools in a very unique way because we're recognizing the difficulties that families have who don't speak English at home or who are very low income, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 for large families. This is not a lot of money, and they face challenges that more affluent families do not. And that's why we send money on a formula without all the bureaucracy of categorical restrictions and programs based on need. Finally, in terms of education, we're providing $1 billion for the adoption of the Common Core standards. This is a great intellectual move. It puts California in the forefront, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of training of the teachers. It's going to take a lot of work throughout the state, and it's going to take some money. And that's why we have that billion as a one-time expenditure, but over a number of years. Finally, besides education, this budget focuses on health reform. We're adopting the Affordable Care Act for California, and we're expanding our Medi-Cal. We're doing so generously and boldly. There's some questions, so we want to do it prudently. And when the state takes over a burden or a service that up to this point is being performed by the counties, we don't want to pay twice. So where there is funding that is now properly something the states ought to use, we'll do it. It's just a matter of equity, but because of the uncertainty, we put in a formula, and it's something we will work out over the next few years as we get experience. So finally, there are risks. You've read about cash. Well, cash is money in the bank today, but we have to be planning for the next 14 months. And the next 14 months have not happened. And the news about the economy has dropped. 4% growth has now become 2% growth. The people who put this budget together in January didn't anticipate the sequester, and it didn't anticipate the payroll tax restoration. Both of those have hit our economy, and the austerity pressure coming out of Washington and also coming out of the global economy, particularly in Europe, has lowered our economic projections. And that's what we base budgets on. So this is a prudent budget. It's one that responds to our educational and our health challenges, but it's one that, unlike those of the past, is going to be very prudent because we're sailing into some rather uncertain times, as we always have. I'll be glad to take any questions. Wait, will you say it just again? Go ahead.
Could you elaborate how are you planning to fix the needs that will come with an immigration reform in California?
How will we fix immigration reform?
No. How do you plan to resolve the needs that we will face when we have immigration reform? I know that you just sent a letter to Senator Feinstein.
Well, first of all, we hope the Congress does it. It's very hopeful that some key Republicans as well as Democrats are pushing immigration reform. That is really vital to California. And in this budget, where we direct funding to those school districts based on how many children are not English speakers at the beginning, their families are speaking another language, that's very important for immigration reform and to make use of it in a beneficial way. And finally, our Medi-Cal expansion does the same thing.
Governor, the chart that you have here about your local funding formula seems to make the point that the concentration grants are just 4 cents of every dollar.
They are.
In which case, someone would say, well, so why not just push it back into the other part of it? Because that's what you're hearing upstairs, that the concentration grants are a problem.
All right. Now, let's notice the difference between this and this. When you this isn't going to get you too far if you're paying for all that this is paying for. But if you concentrated on those districts that are very impacted by non-English speaking, by foster care kids, and by poverty, you get more bang for your buck. And that's the point of the concentration grant. If you spray it over the whole 6 million kids, they'll hardly notice it. If you concentrate it, as my formula does, you can make some dramatic improvements in areas that really we've neglected.
Is it a line in the sand for the legislature?
Look, there have been governors before that drew lines in the sand and issued diktats to the legislature. I don't do that. We have 3 branches of government. I'm making my proposal. I believe in this formula. I think it's just. It's crucial for the well-being of our future. I'm going to do everything I can to get it. At the end of the day, I have my legislative colleagues, and we will have a vigorous discussion. But I'm pretty confident that we got a powerful principle. So there's the political power of all those who are affected, and there's the moral power of treating unequals in a way that takes account of their inequality.
Governor, it appears that your administration has concluded that this little surge of revenues that we got really nets out to around $3 billion, and that you would allocate virtually all of it, not quite all of it, on a one-time basis to schools. Is that an accurate summary of what you said?
No, I would put it this way. Over a 3-year period, the actual net over revenues is about $800 million. If you figure our general fund in 3 years is $300 billion, the $800 million is about 0.28, 0.28. Not a lot of money here, folks. We have climbed out of a hole with a Proposition 30 tax. That's good. But this is not the time to break out the champagne. And by the way, there is, you're the one who says it, there's $1 trillion debt out there. Now, assuming you're 80 to 90% wrong, that's still $100 to $200 million out there that we got to take account of. So it's a call for prudence, not exuberance.
The reason I ask the question is that the advocates of health and welfare programs that have been cut in the last few years are saying it's time to restore that. What's your reaction to that?
No.
No?
No. The money's not there. We have obligations under Prop 98, and we have incredible responsibilities under the Affordable Care Act, and the known unknowns are considerable. So anybody who thinks there's spare change around has not read the budget, and Anna can explain that in her own inimitable way.
Governor, you're allocating $72 million more for county probation departments. Is that an acknowledgement that realignment needs some fixing?
No. What that's an acknowledgement of is under the blueprint for our prisons, it turned out that the cost of housing prisoners was lower than the formula that was the basis of our county support. And so we increased the amount of money because that we think that's a fair representation of the cost of housing inmates that are now being handled locally. If you're asking me, is realignment, like a perfect surgery? No. Like everything else around here and in life, we learn from experience and we adjust accordingly. And we do have an adjustment in here for those who are being sent to prison, rather jail for longer terms, and we have a fix for that.
Governor Brown, the budget, as I read it, doesn't appear to have any more money for the judicial branch. They've been complaining for some time that they've had to close down courtrooms, limit access to justice. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, the judiciary is getting the same amount of money they had the year before. The Speaker has spoken about giving more money, and I'm sure there will be a lot of give and take as we go through the process.
Does that mean you're opening the possibility that...
Well, no. What I was saying is they are getting level funding. So obviously their costs are going up, and they got to figure out ways to control it. It's not that easy. All these institutions, courts, universities, hospitals, huge costs, and everybody has to get used to managing it because we've been used to this overcommitment at the federal level, at the state level, and we're trying to now have honest budgeting and careful budgeting. And so that's why we've held them level. And in fact, under Proposition 98 this year, we have to make 103% of the funding that's available this year for schools. Now, next year there'll be a little more funding, but this is a 3-year exercise, and we got to be careful. There's a reason why this budget was always in deficit, because there's a lot of needs out there, and there's very articulate advocates, and I'm trying to find the right balance between spending and holding the line.
Governor, can we talk about your Medi-Cal expansion?
Struggling.
What?
Counties are already struggling with realignment, prison realignment.
Right.
Now you're proposing like $1.5 billion in the health field. Can you talk a little bit, elaborate a little bit on why that's a good idea? And
Where's the
why we need to do this?
1.5?
Well, there's a $1.5 billion number in the budget over time.
No, you know what, that's another one. You got to look at these things, with a careful lens. Anna will explain that. All we're saying in the health care is if counties are taking care of indigents and they become eligible for our Medi-Cal expansion, we don't want to pay twice, because we are going to pay under the Medi-Cal system. So that's our point. By the way, Medi-Cal has two components, the expansion does. One, only 60% of the eligible are signed up. Under certain rules in the Affordable Care Act, that'll probably go up to 80%. That 80% will be paid half by the state. When we go above the current level of income eligibility, then we get 100% for the next couple of years. So there are going to be costs imposed on the state budget. Those costs represent burdens taken away from the counties. It's not exactly clear how much, and that's why we have a formula, and we're going to work through it over the next couple of years.
And Governor Brown, that formula seems to be a breakthrough. Other counties on board with this idea that you would take the money slowly over time and based on their actual experience.
Well, I don't think the counties would argue that they're entitled to double payment. So let's supposing family X is being supported at the county hospital. All of a sudden, they're now eligible for Medi-Cal. Why should they get a state payment for what they're not doing? Now, the question is how much, and that's something we don't know today, but we'll learn over time. But we do know that when we're adding 2 to 3 million new people, we're going to take some county responsibility. And when we do, we feel it's only fair that the counties not be paid for what they're not doing.
Why not have the counties manage that, the expansion?
Too complicated. Ask Diana. But we went through that. It's too complex, and we couldn't figure out a way to make it work.
Governor, are you making any changes to how quickly you pay off the wall of debt, or is it the same schedule as in January?
I think it's the same schedule, but check with Anna on those kind of.
Governor, it looks like you're changing up the sales tax for the
what?
enterprise zone
Yes.
program. It looks like you're changing the sales tax to a statewide credit, but it's unclear whether you're preserving the overall enterprise zone program.
Well, we have a proposal. We have a proposal to make it more efficient. The enterprise zone works in funny ways. I know because we used it in Oakland, and then we got audit exceptions. So I know it's loose. Also, sometimes people get rewarded after they've already made the hiring, maybe a year or two later. So that's not an incentive. Secondly, as the company that went from Brisbane to somewhere in the Central Valley, why should you get a tax payment for leaving, a tax credit for leaving one part of California and go to another? So this is an effort to use this money that will really create a job incentive, and I think Anna can explain it better than I can.
Governor, do you hope that the $1 billion for Common Core standards will help alleviate some of the concerns over your school funding proposal?
Well, if it does, that's good. But Common Core is a challenging intellectual exercise that our 330,000 teachers are going to have to go through. It's going to take training, it's going to take time, and that money is wise to have around. Some of the states are having difficulty implementation, so that's what we're doing. By the way, I think that's good. If I were in a school district and now I find out I have extra money for the Common Core implementation, which I know is going to cost money, that will be good. But I think this program, 80 cents base grant, 16 cents supplemental grant, 4 cents for the few people in the concentrated districts, I think it's fair. I think it's just, and I think it has great moral force.
Do you think it will be enough to appease the legislature's concerned about that program?
I think the idea in a Democratic legislature of helping the less advantaged is very persuasive. Now, maybe if we were talking about another group of people, maybe the Tea Party or maybe some other ideological folk, they might look more skeptically. But I think most Democrats, in their heart of hearts, want to help those who life has not given the same opportunities that they have to the majority.
The Education Department, they try to do some modeling of the local control funding formula. Their analysis of it seems to suggest that about half the districts would actually get less under the LCFF versus current law.
No, I don't believe that's not true. And I let Anna, that is not true. But I asked Anna for those details. But you're making it cost 50%. I'm just saying no.
Right. I mean, but can you talk about the concerns of some districts that they're going to come out on the
There's some,
losing end?
I would like Anna to talk about, because there's lots of, some districts have huge amounts of money. There are very few, 34,000 per child, very unusual. So they're already doing pretty well. This is giving more. Everybody's going to do better, but some are going to do, considerably better. By the way, if you ask somebody in Beverly Hills or Palo Alto or Piedmont, would you like to move to Compton? Would you like to move to Watts? And if they say, yeah, let's do it because I want to get the extra money, then I'll believe it. But I don't think so. And anybody who walks through this state, as I have for the last many years, there are differences. And this formula recognizes the differences in a way that's not only just, but is crucial to our future well-being. Because we remember, we got 3 million kids in homes that are low income, and we got 2 million kids where they speak a language other than English. And we have all these older, well-speaking folk getting old. We've got a lot of these old white guys, all right? Now, they're being replaced with a whole new group of people. And these people, I don't know, we got 10 million immigrants in this state, 12 million. We've got to invest there. That is key to our continued well-being. If you look over there in Europe, one of the reasons they're stagnating is just pure demographics. And we're benefited by the fact that people chose to come here to California. Now we've got to get them legalized, and then we've got to make sure our school system deals with them. When the Russian immigrants went to Israel, they had a whole program to get them to learn Hebrew and get them assimilated. That's a good thing. Well, we got to do the same thing.
But Governor, what about those school districts that don't have quite the 50% of the disadvantaged students, who might have 45% who are going to miss out on these extra funds? San Jose has one of those.
That's the concentration grant.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is a very small part of it. But
what about those districts? Are they going to be able to, educate the disadvantaged kids at the same level as the other districts?
I think they're going to get the supplemental grants, but this is one of those formulas that I know a certain amount. I'd rather turn to my expert here who could respond to it. I know that the Mercury said there was something about the property tax. Let her answer that, because I asked her the same question myself.
Governor, how about a broader question, if I could, on the state's economy and finances? There's a fairly healthy debate about hydraulic fracking of oil. And some people say it could be a big boon to the economy, could be boon to tax dollars of the state. Yes. There's an intense debate about what to do. Where do you stand on the issue?
I stand on intelligent analysis of the issues. We have a very good Division of Oil and Gas. They're reviewing this. The legislature has several bills. This is not about just saying ideologically yay or nay. It's about looking at what could be a fabulous opportunity. But we want to make sure about the aquifers. Some people are talking about earthquakes, a lot of different things. What are the chemicals? What do we know? And in addition, climate change is real. Now, the reason why I have some sympathy for oil drilling in California is because 98% of the people are using oil that is imported. And until we get them in electric cars or walking or riding on bikes, we need oil. But we got to get off it. Climate change is very real. We just passed 400 parts per million on May 8th. This is serious stuff. So I have to balance my strong commitment to dealing with climate change, renewable energy, with what could be a fabulous economic opportunity. And if you remember about oil drilling in Long Beach, which was really pioneered, I think, when my father was governor, poured, I don't know how many billions into higher education. And this could be good, but there are issues, and I want to look at them. I don't deal with this thing, oh, the sky's falling in, or, utopia's arrived. We've got to look at it. These are hard questions, and we're going to look at them in a thoughtful
Sounds like you disagree with the moratorium, then.
I would like to see, I haven't, let's see the evidence, First of all, I don't think they're ready to go yet. There's a lot of technical engineering issues, so I think we have time to do it right.
Governor, what about the possibility of an oil severance tax, particularly given the potential for
Now,
moderate
look,
shales?
we've just got a nice tax. 55% of the people voted for it, and I think we ought to take a deep breath and show how we're spending it in a wise way before we start looking around to fill up more money. And by the way, those people who talk about an oil tax, good luck. The last time they had one, the oil company spent almost $50 million fighting it. So ideas that in the abstract may seem appealing, when you put them on the ground, you find out they don't work quite as well.
Governor, on prisons, does your plan, your budget here have a contingency for implementing the federal order? And if not, would that impact the budget in any significant way?
Well, the federal order wants more people out.
Right.
So we'll have to just see. I mean, this has been going on a long time. And we have to make our budget on what we know. Now, what I know is that since the Supreme Court made their ruling, by the way, they made their ruling on a record that rejected evidence that we tried to put in when I was Attorney General that showed improvement in our prisons. Since that time, there's been even more improvement. I mean, real big money, and not money just thrown down a rat hole, but money for state-of-the-art health facilities at San Quentin, at Stockton, hiring a psychiatrist, psychologist, system of record keeping. The prisons have really invested a lot of money here. The federal test of cruel and unusual punishment is whether or not the state is deliberately indifferent. We are not deliberately indifferent. So I think it's only responsible to appeal this thing until the court tells me no. And if they tell me no, fine, we're going to follow it.
So just to clarify, this document does not assume the implementation of the court order. It assumes that your appeal is
Well,
successful.
that's a good question. If the court order, we have a plan, and, if the legislature votes for it, then we'll have to find the money. That's true, it costs money. But relative to the total budget, I'm sure we can find funds if that's where the legislature wants to go.
On higher education, why abandon credit hour caps?
Credit hour caps. Is that because the universities are going for it?
More time to implement based on where...
We have to take more time. The idea, look, here's the idea. We want to get more people through than we currently do. And we want kids not to take 7 years or 6 years, but 4 years. And then if they get through in 4 years instead of 7, there's more space, and we can add more students, increase capacity, and the kids don't borrow as much money, and they get into the workforce sooner. That's the point. Now, when you start putting little caps here and there, then people get all nervous. So we, like everything else, we take it in steps, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward.
Governor, I think you're still in bargaining with
What?
unions on their contracts, right?
Oh, we haven't even started yet, I think.
Oh, you haven't started. Does this budget account for any kind of raise or percentage?
Well, that's one of the interesting things about bargaining. If you put in a number in the budget, then they know where they're going.
So what'd you do?
Well, it's always been a dilemma. Always a dilemma, and I don't have a good answer to it. So, but suffice it to say, we're aiming low.
If at all, right?
Yeah.
Governor, you repeatedly talk about fiscal discipline. How concerned are you that your colleagues, your Democratic colleagues in the legislature, aren't going to hear that message?
Well, I think they do hear it. They've been talking about the need for, John Perez talked about the need for reserve. Darrell Steinberg has been recognizing the limits, so that's good.
But that's just the leaders, though. I mean, there's also talk that other members want to see more spending.
Everybody wants to see more spending. That's what this place is. It's a big spending machine. You need something? Come here and see if you can get it. Well, but I'm the backstop at the end, and I'm going to keep this budget balanced as long as I'm around here, if I can. Now, there's so damn many uncertainties out there in the world. That's why I'm going to want to keep more money in reserve than those who have immediate needs.
But with the simple majority, though, there's a lot more
I mean,
It's
a
easier.
super majority.
Well, but with the simple majority
Yeah.
vote, though, I mean, it's
Yeah.
much easier for certain elements to push for a spending increase.
They can push and I can push back. At the end of the day, they need a governor's signature. That's a little different. Before, I said, can you make the cuts?
Sure.
Can you vote a tax? Today, they're saying, can you sign the bill? Big difference. It's a big difference today than we were 2 years ago.
But can't they override?
Wait, we got it. You've had two. This has been totally ignored.
Could I get you to prognosticate on?
What?
Can I get you to?
Prognosticate or pontificate?
Well, pontificate. Both. On California's
I'd
economy.
rather obfuscate today.
You could do that. On California's economy, you know, we are seeing this bump in personal income taxes, and you know, the numbers seem to be going well. Housing's up. I'm wondering, you know, do you see us in a bubble, or is this short-lived? Should, you know, just in terms of California's economy,
Okay.
how healthy are we?
I'll answer that by referring to an article in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago of a conference of macro economists, the guys who think about, and the gals who think about the big picture. And the conclusion was that they're not sure what fiscal stability is, and they're not sure what the proper remedy is. And they're not quite sure where we are. So we do have the Krugmanians and we have the Austerians. Both are making their arguments. For the moment, Austerians are a little more in the driver's seat, and that does curb revenue. But remember, whatever extra money's out there is probably capital gains. So you're betting on the stock market. And in years past, we've had governors that did that, and they bet that more was coming in than actually did. So we got a pretty good record here of boom and bust, and my inclination is to be more prudent than we have been in the past.
We have time for one more.
Along the same lines, a lot of people have heard about the surge in revenues this
Yeah.
year. Can you explain what changes have happened at the federal level that have dampened that?
Two things. One, the sequester, and more importantly, the 2% bump in the payroll tax that hits workers right in their pocket. And that definitely seems to be the major force. Then, of course, we have Europe that's still floundering, and we have China slowing down, and all those global players affect the economy in California. That's why the consensus forecast is down from where it was in January, and we have to take that seriously. Cash is what you have now. It's quite possible people in December prepaid because they expect the federal taxes to go up even more or something, whatever they were doing. So that's why we got to be careful. All right, I'll let you talk to our gnomes.
Hang out in dark places. All right, so want to walk through a couple of numbers and then answer any of your questions. So many questions about revenues. Revenues are up by $1.3 billion over the 3-year period. Of that, about $500 million is associated with cap and trade revenues being loaned to the general fund. So as the governor said, the difference in the big three revenues that are affecting our Prop 98 are about $800 million. There's a big difference in the pattern of those revenues. So this year, revenues are up by $2.8 billion. Next year, revenues are, what?
This year being
12-13, we're up by $2.8 billion. 13-14, we're down by $1.3 billion. After, yeah.
$2.8 billion is by the end of the fiscal year, you expect to be up $2.8 billion?
Correct.
So not the 4.5 that the LAO is
And
right now.
I'll explain that if you give me about 15 seconds.
Okay.
All right. So 2.8 billion up in 12-13, 1.3 billion down in 13-14. If we adjust it for the cap and trade, then it would be about 1.8 billion down for what is happening with our big three revenues. As the governor said, there's a difference between cash and what that translates into the revenues. There's a couple of things going on. As you know, we've ended the month of April and about $4.5 billion higher in cash. How does 4.5 become 2.8? One is that a portion of those revenues are actually attributable to prior years or to next year. So when you look at cash versus accrual, that accounts for about $400 million of the difference. So some of those dollars are being booked in either of the bookends of the 12-13 budget. The second issue is that when we've looked at our cash patterns, in January, we built our revenue cash patterns based on what it had been historically. There are a lot of changes that have been made in the last couple of years that affect the timing of revenues. When we've taken a closer look at what our pattern was last year, which we think is a more realistic pattern, we see less money coming in May and in June than we initially anticipated at governor's budget. So we anticipate that revenues based on just timing are going to be about $700 million lower. That's moving into next year. And then the last piece is the issue that the governor raised relative to the economic forecast and what's going on with wages. So our personal income forecast is substantially lower than it was at governor's budget based on the changes in federal policy as well as what we've been seeing going on with wages. So we see unemployment is coming down, but the hours worked by those employees is actually lower than in the latest reports than it previously had been. That's bringing down our wage forecast, which is having an impact on our revenue forecast. So we are looking at receipts that are going to be lower by a couple $100 million between now through July 1st based on the wage changes.
So follow up to that.
Sure.
So if that's true, where are you getting the $2.6 billion in one-time funds that you propose to give the schools for Common Core and for debt pay down?
So there's a couple of things that are going on that, and if the guarantee's up, one thing that to explain is the guarantee's up by $2.9 billion this year. So there's lots of different parts that are changing.
This year being the current fiscal year.
Current fiscal year. So a $2.8 billion increase in general fund revenues, $2.9 billion increase in the Prop 98 guarantee. Part of what's going on with when we're looking at what's happening in terms of the use of those additional resources, we're paying more deferrals this year, we're paying less deferrals next year. The Prop 98 guarantee is a little less than $1 billion. It's $941 million down next year. So when you're looking at the guarantee over a 2-year period, when we're looking at what's going on, there's $1 billion in additional dollars for Common Core, and we're paying roughly $758 million of additional dollars in deferrals. So because you have an increase in the guarantee this year of 2.9, and we're roughly $1 billion down next year. So part of it is a change in when we're receiving revenues, when schools are going to receive those additional funds. And then a commensurate change in the pattern in the proposed funding for education.
So the additional money you have to pay the schools under Prop 98 is basically you're giving it to them as one-time money for Common Core and deferral pay down?
Yeah, but remember that when you pay down deferrals in 1 year, the following year you have more ongoing funding. So ongoing funding next year actually increases because when we pay down more deferrals, we're freeing up some of next year's money, and it's providing us additional room to be able to pay for programs.
I know what we're trying to get to here is that there's been a lot of publicity about the 4.5, and now you say it's more like 3. And that money's going to schools, basically.
Yes, more than the amount of money that's coming in is going to schools. The Prop 98 guarantee is going up by 103% of the increase in revenues.
So on the Common Core, just to make sure I understand, the Common Core billion is in the 98 guarantee.
Correct.
So is it extra under the guarantee, or are you earmarking part of the guarantee for Common Core?
It's part of the guarantee just drives what's the total amount of general fund revenues that we have to provide. The governor still has to provide the spending plan for how to do that. So this is part of how he proposes to use the higher dollars in the guarantee.
It's an earmark.
It's within the guarantee, providing one-time resources for Common Core implementation.
Just to make clear one more time, what you said, schools are getting, there's $2.9 billion more in the first 6 months of this year than you guys thought, right?
Yeah, 2.8.
2.8.
And then there's
schools are getting 103% of that?
So there's $2.9 billion increase in the Prop 98 guarantee this year.
For 12-13.
Correct. Okay. Next year, because the revenues are lower, the guarantee is lower by another $900 million.
So it's down over, it's not down over projections, it's down 1.3 over the 12-13 revenues, right? The general fund gets smaller?
The general fund gets smaller, yes, and the revenues that actually count towards 98 are down by 1.8.
Okay.
Can I break that down? We'll have you break that down just one
Sure.
more time. $4.5 billion extra in revenue this year.
Yes.
But that's translating for this coming fiscal year into 2.8.
Correct.
For however you're doing the books. But the schools are getting 2.9 however you're doing the books.
Yes.
Is that?
That's
In a
right.
nutshell?
That's
Okay.
right. The only piece that I would add is that schools are getting 2.9 more this year, but they're getting 941 less next year. So the net change is when we look at those two numbers.
That makes up for the extra money over the 2.8.
Yeah.
From January, you were at 97 billion for the general fund, now you're down to 96.
Yes.
What's the real simple
Uh,
answer for why?
Property
that's
tax
going down?
revenues are up. So when there's higher property tax revenues, both from the elimination of redevelopment agencies as well as from the forecast being up, then our general fund expenditures for Prop 98 are going down. And then the Prop 98 guarantee is down a little bit, and those are the main changes. There's other areas of spending that are up, but the single largest factor is the property tax forecast being higher and how that affects the budget in terms of our spending in schools and community colleges.
A question about well, two questions. First, with the 13-14 year, you said $1.3 billion down. That's compared to what?
Compared to January.
The January estimate.
Yes.
Okay. And the other question we have is.
Wait, now I've lost my train of thought. That was so artful.
So on the 4.5. All right.
I've got it now.
All right, you got it.
Is there any additional money for schools in 11-12 because of Prop 30?
In 11, well, that was already reflected in the governor's budget, right? So there
Okay,
was
so that
already
number
there was
doesn't
already 11-12. The revenues in 11-12 are changing a little bit.
Just
but
a little bit. Okay, we can ignore that. So 12-13 again up 2.8 over where you thought, and then in the following year, you just said that it's down over January projections, not.
It's
Not-
still down on a year-over-year basis
Okay.
because of the acceleration of capital gains and other income from
And those
2013 to
numbers are-
2012. That was already partially reflected in the governor's budget, and it's
Okay.
increased in the mayor revision. So we're seeing more dollars being accelerated from one year to the next. I mean,
Okay, sorry.
I'm
And the
done.
reason it was 2.8 and not.
anybody other than their colleagues from the LA Times who wants to ask questions before I answer the next one?
So the reason it's 2.8 and not 4.5 is because some money being counted in different fiscal years.
Some of it is being counted in different fiscal years
So
based
11,
on.
12, and 13.
Some of it is 11, 12, 12, and 13, 14. Some of it is because our January estimate of the amount of cash that we were going to be receiving this year overstated the amount of cash that was going to come in May and June. So we're up, but this other piece is coming down. And then the other piece is because our economic forecast, and particularly our wage forecast, is down. So we see revenues being a little
But
down.
for 12-13, or so far the first 6 months of 13 because of the payroll tax change.
Yes.
Okay, but if the money's being counted in different fiscal years, isn't that also going to go to schools though, too?
And that is part of the reason why the guarantee is not dropping by a higher amount in 13-14. And the big changes are 13-14 and 12-13. There's only a $200 million change in 11-12 in terms of this piece. I'll go to you in a second, George.
I got a question. We're wrestling here over projections for 6 months, but you've got up there 2016 and 17, 3 years ahead, how much each student's going to get. I mean, how can you do that? I mean, we can't even figure out 3 months ahead, let alone 3 years.
We look at what has happened in the past and what do we think is going to happen in the future, and we make our best estimate for what we think is going to happen in the economy and what's going to happen with the revenues.
How can you look ahead 3 years, though? I mean,
How
look
can
at the last 3 years.
We look at what has happened in the past, what are the recoveries generally following, a recession, and what do we think is going to happen. It's, we look at it twice a year, and we take our best shot at what do we think is going on with the economy and what's going on with revenues, and we do the same thing with expenditures.
Where does just quickly, the money for the local control funding
Yeah.
formula, the additional money that's
Yes.
in the revised vis-a-vis January, where does it come from? Is
Where-
that,
It's basically resources available within the Prop 98 guarantee. Basically, we're paying more deferrals this year and then reducing the amount of deferral repayments next year. There's also some changes to the governor's proposed adult education change. So in the governor's budget, he was proposing an increase of $300 million in adult education as part of and maybe this is a good time to walk through what's going on the Prop 98 side. So a couple of big changes on 98.
but the bottom line is it's under 98.
It's all under 98. Yeah,
Go ahead.
the minimum guarantee is funded in both years, so that's basically funding at the minimum guarantee level. So basically, the adult education proposal, the governor proposed to restructure adult education and shift responsibility for some of that to community colleges, but allow community colleges to contract with K-12 districts. lots of concerns were raised about unintended consequences. So the May revision basically delays the adult education proposed change and restructures the way in which it would work. Basically, for the next 2 years, there'd be planning grants for regional consortia of community colleges and K-12 districts to work on how to best meet needs for adult education. And then it provides for $500 million that would be available to existing programs and new programs. 75% would have to go to existing programs to expand adult education. Not spending those $300 million and instead spending $270 provides some additional resources to do more growth in local control funding.
I'm sure you pay more in deferrals this year then.
$758 million.
Are there other accelerated wall of debt?
Not in the budget year. So the net change for the wall of debt is $258 million. There's one piece that, before we get to questions, there's one piece that we wanted to show you to try to clear up some of the questions about how the concentration factor works. Because folks have been, there's been a misunderstanding for how generally the formula works. So this is our stab at trying to make it simple. So we'll see if it works. We'll see if it works. Yeah, it's sort of in there, and it's in our education one. It's different numbers, but it's the same concept. So, you know, today the formula for how district funding is coordinated, calculated, is really complicated. Next, going forward, basically there will be 3 sets of calculations, and you establish what the base grant is. And this is what the average grant would be for a statewide high school districts. Then you look at what is a district's concentration, how many low-income students, English language learners, and foster youth the district is serving. And you can see that the bulk of the additional dollars that are coming for those kids are coming from the supplemental grants and are available to all kids, whatever district they are being educated in. And that's where and we picked 58.8% because that's the statewide average of students that we'd be looking at. The concentration grant is up to 17.5%, and it's scalable. So I think maybe it was you who asked the question about what happens to the district that's 40%. You can see that the bulk of the money that they're getting is coming for as part of the supplemental grant. That's 35%. So the difference between a district that's at 45% versus 55% that's coming from the concentration factor, it's really quite small. Because the concentration factor is for the difference between 50 and 58, and it's up to a total cap of 17.5%. So it makes a big difference, as the governor said, for the districts that have really high concentrations, like the districts that have 78 or 80% or 100%. But the difference between somebody at 47 and somebody at 52, it's quite negligible. And the bulk of the additional resources that are being provided to kids based on their needs comes in the form of a supplemental grant.
So the CDE attempted to do some modeling.
Yeah.
I mean, can you address sort of the discrepancy?
Yeah.
Because they suggest that under current law, there's a whole lot of more losers than what.
The underlying challenge is that when you look at CDE, you know, the challenge is that how do you construct what is current law? There is not, and CDE basically, what they did was they said, assume that there's more dollars to spend next year than the budget is actually producing, and compare next year's formula as if it was fully implemented to a model that restores revenue limits and restores categoricals. They ignored the effect of the COLA that would be provided under the formula and assumed something that's not the governor's proposal. The effect of that is that the numbers provided under the governor's proposal are too low because they're not showing the COLA effect, and they're assuming full implementation next year. And it has a distortive effect in showing what happens to districts. So when you look at a district like, like Oakland, and you ignore what happens under the COLAs, you're not showing a true characterization of what the governor's proposal is. Governor's not proposing to implement next year. It's begin implementation next year, with full implementation happening within 7 years. And the governor's proposal includes COLA and continues to adjust all the bases. So that's the fundamental difference. Anything else you'd add, Nick?
No, other than that, that illustration with a couple of more are in the budget pamphlet document. So I suggest reading that document, and it's actually a decent read. You'll have it all explained to you. And a couple other things that I think people have been doing is, you know, as the governor mentioned, people have been inflating the concentration grant to make it seem like it's a much larger pot of money than it is. They've also been sort of thinking that, you know, once you hit this magic threshold of 50%, all of a sudden you get a bunch more money. It's not like that. A school district that is at 40% gets more money than a school district at 39%, just as a district that is at 50% gets a little bit more money than a district that is at 49%. So it's, you know, as your percentage of low income and English learner students increases in your district, you get relatively more money, and it just accelerates a little bit once you get over the 50% threshold.
Could you say just generally?
So give me 1 second.
Carbon trade revenue, could you go over that again?
So the May revision reflects a loan of $500 million from cap and trade revenues that is available as a loan to the general fund in the same way in which special fund loans have been done for an extended period of time. Hence the answer to your question of 258 versus 758.
Is that different from the January?
It's different than the January budget. But it's the same level of benefit to the general fund from a budgetary standpoint. It's just a different way of achieving it.
Is that because cap and trade is falling short?
It's because it was deemed that this is a better and more prudent approach to take for the May revision at this point in time, and to work a little longer on exactly what expenditures we'd be looking at proposing from cap and trade going forward.
You've said a couple of times that that wages are down. Is that because more people are going from full-time to part-time work?
The biggest changes that are driving our forecast, as the governor mentioned, are the changes in the national economy and changes in California economy based on the different federal policy than what was anticipated at the governor's budget. In January, we were anticipating that there was something else that was going to be worked out that did not have the payroll tax go back into effect and did not have sequestration. That is downgrading the forecast and changing the rate of recovery. When we look at near-term wages, part of what we're seeing is unemployment is coming down, but the number of hours worked is also coming down. So we're seeing wages growing at a slower rate based on these different factors.
And why are hours decreasing?
Irina, what say you?
The jobs that are being added tend to be more of a mix towards part-time. So it's not the case that full-time people are now being cut down to part-time. It's more that the jobs that are being added, which makes people be unemployed rather than unemployed, those are part-time.
Do you think that has anything to do with the Affordable Care Act?
I think we're looking at this as, this is basically what we're seeing coming up now based on the changes in consumer confidence, the rate of where we are on the recovery, people are being pretty cautious. You know, for a long time, we've been seeing lots of corporations sit in substantial amounts of cash and taking a while and being cautious about where to invest it. The continued, questions about what's going on in Asia and some of our trading partners and the extent to which the Chinese economy is slowing down and what might be going on with Japan and South Korea. There's questions about what's going on there, what's going on in Europe, and there's overall, a weak recovery that is atypical for coming out of the recession, and folks are being cautious with what they're doing with their dollars and the rate at which they're investing.
Anna, could you say what schools do with these deferral payments? It's not like a windfall for them. How are they absorbing this money?
Generally, schools are borrowing in the open market to maintain a higher level of program than what we're funding at any particular point in time. But we have had some school districts who have limited market access and have not been able to borrow to the full effect, and they've had to make some reductions. Paying down the deferral not only helps us make sure that today's money is available to pay for today's program, but it also reduces the borrowing cost for school districts, and it helps them be able to spend more money in the classroom.
The $240 million, is that distributed the same way as the
Correct.
Larger pot of money?
Yes.
Yeah.
No changes in the rest of the formula.
About education. On the enterprise zone stuff and the economic development, it looks like you're tweaking the hiring new jobs hiring credit, expanding the sales tax to a statewide exemption for specific activities, and creating this new California Competes Recruitment and Retention Fund. Can you explain how overall this will look different from what we've got now?
So-
Especially this new California Competes Fund. Are you supplanting the existing enterprise zone hiring credit with that, or how is that going to work?
We basically have a different structure that we think is going to be more effective in getting dollars into the economy and increasing economic growth. And that one of the big differences is that we look at how do we, California on the whole, benefit, and how do we get more activity in our state, period, not looking at a program that a lot of what it does is move an activity from point A to point B in our state. So one of the biggest pieces is something that you've seen from the governor before, which is an interest in making manufacturing less expensive in California by providing an exclusion from the sales tax, from the state sales tax rate for manufacturing in our state. So we think that that is a more effective expenditure than enterprise zones. And then the other piece that we do is basically create a state fund that would be available to administered by GoBiz that could be used to provide a tax credit to individual employers who are coming to California and tie it to real outcomes and real jobs in our state.
So does that mean you're not going to have the enterprise zones continue in their current form?
We would restructure those two programs to do what we think are activities that are more effective, that are that are more consistent with what the theory of enterprise zones and the hiring credit was, and not with the reality that we've seen from both of those programs.
So what do you score it at?
It's revenue neutral.
Just to go back,
What would the sales tax exemption be worth to manufacturers, do you think?
It's 4% of the roughly 4% of the cost of buying manufacturing equipment.
just go back real quick to cap and trade. How much are you projecting?
500.
500, and it's going to be a loan to the general fund?
Correct.
Okay.
Do I get to?
You go
I
first.
just want to say how terrific the local control funding formula chart was. And
I was hoping maybe, could we talk a little bit about the generous and bold Medi-Cal spending?
That sounds good. And Diana, you want to come up with me? So in terms of the plan for implementation of healthcare reform, as the governor mentioned, it's really the state-based expansion for how we would move forward. So it'd be the Medicaid program that would be expanded to cover adults who don't have eligible children who are low income. The scope of benefits would include all of the benefits that are provided to Medicaid enrollees today. Long-term care would be provided subject to an acid test. When there are a number of different expansions that are happening in one that reduce the number of uninsured, as well as the extent to which counties would have care that uninsured individuals present with that is not compensated. So so we have simplification, as the governor mentioned. That's going to increase the number of people who are currently eligible but don't have coverage for the whole scope of the year. We have the expansion to folks who are not eligible today. When we expand the program to serve people who are not eligible today, we also have an expansion in our limited scope or emergency services program that provides services and the reason why I'm telling you all of this is because much has been discussed about how many uninsured remain. And one of the key questions is not only how many people remain uninsured, but it's how many people remain uninsured that don't have a fund source for their cost, right? Because when we look at the remaining uninsured number, that, for example, could include undocumented individuals. When we think about what happens with their cost, people who are not qualified immigrants are eligible for emergency services, so there's going to be a federal fund source coming with that. People who don't, necessarily enroll in the program, there's presumptive eligibility at the provider rate, so at the provider level. So there are lots of mechanisms to make sure that even when somebody is not enrolled in the program in the way in which we traditionally think about it, there's going to be opportunities to access federal funds and access state funds to pay for the care for those individuals.
So even though they're uninsured, they get care, but in a less expensive way?
There's a fund source to pay for their care, and their episode of needing care may be covered. When we think about our Medi-Cal program, and we think about 8 million people enrolled, over the course of a year, that's 9.5 million. So we have people coming into the program when they need care and leaving the program at other points in time. More of them will stay. But that means that when thinking about what's happening from a county standpoint, we have to think about what costs are they going to be left with that's not going to have a fund source. And looking at the number of people who are enrolled at any one point in time is only one of the data points that one needs to consider. So the state would expand the Medicaid program. The state would take on the responsibility. So then the question arises, why would the state continue to provide $1.5 billion to assist counties with the responsibility that they will now not be having, since the state will be paying for that coverage? So we look at basically shifting those resources from healthcare programs to human services programs, which not only has the benefit of helping make healthcare reform more affordable and sustainable for the state, but it also has the effect of more clearly delineating the responsibilities for health and human services programs between the state and the counties in a way that we think will make more sense and be better from a human services standpoint. The budget provides a specific mechanism for how to capture savings. So one of the concerns that has come up from the counties, which is a very valid concern that we agree with, is that we know generally what the theory is, but who is going to sign up, when are they going to sign up, where are they going to show up, and how many people are going to be left for whom there's not going to be a fund source. So the mechanism, basically, we have an estimate that we've included in the budget, but the actual savings that would be directed to human services programs at the local level would be based on the reality of what occurs with people presenting. So we'd be basically comparing what's happening with today with total costs for uninsured and for Medi-Cal. How does that compare to total revenues? We capture the savings, and those savings are the ones that are redirected. So to a county that is providing a significant amount of outpatient services to people who will remain uninsured and for whom there won't be a fund source, those dollars they basically get to keep.
So does that mechanism that you guys are talking about, does that build on the existing low-income health plan infrastructure at the counties? Or is this similar to what a lot of the advocates are proposing now, where you leave the county funding in place for 3 years? Is that what you guys are talking about?
It's not exactly it's not the same thing. We basically would be looking at having the savings increase over time. It starts at 300 million and it goes up to 900 and then it goes up to 1.3. And yes, and we have an estimate. Again, the savings that will be redirected will be based on the reality of what's occurring. We're basically would be using those dollars for human services programs. We think that because the mechanism takes into account remaining costs for the uninsured, for which there isn't a fund source, we're making sure that dollars remain. Another key elements would be making sure that that we maintain stability in the patient population that's being served by safety net providers that are public safety net providers, so that we can make sure that there's continued support for county clinics and county hospitals.
So the administration's preference, instead of reducing those 91 realignment funds or whatever that is to have a programmatic shift, right, where counties take on responsibilities for new programs and not necessarily taking their cash, right?
Correct. We are basically, all the dollars would remain local revenues. They are transitioning from local health dollars to local human services dollars.
Okay. And do you have a list of programs that you would like to see?
CalWORKs and CalWORKs Linked Childcare are the two main programs. And then depending on what happens on the dollars, then we would have Food Stamps Administration as the other piece where counties would assume a greater responsibility.
The goal eventually is to have CalWORKs totally operated by the counties, and that will be a byproduct of implementation.
We would continue to have state policy and state direction. So grants, eligibility levels, all of those things would continue to be state policies, but counties administer the program today. Counties would continue to administer the program, and the program would be funded locally.
That was the bold and generous thing? What you just said?
The bold and generous thing is to expand coverage to millions of people and do it in a manner that includes comprehensive benefits like the ones we provide today.
What about, is there a plan for adult dental Medi-Cal for in here?
We maintain the current scope of benefits, which does not include adult dental.
Can I ask about the managed care tech? Managed care tax, why the switch from the gross premiums to the sales?
Basically, as part of trying to work with the federal government to get approval to the coordinated care initiative and achieve the necessary level of savings, we were able to get to an agreement that provides more revenue to the state from this different tax rate. So the tax continues to be the same. It's a managed care organizations. We're continuing to, it works in the same way. We assess the tax, we draw down federal funds, provide some to the providers, and then there's a general fund benefit. It's just happening at a different rate. So instead of being 2.3, it's 3.9.
And do you know how much in dollars that is in a year and
Matt, do you know off the top?
benefit to the state?
Yeah. HD will get that to you.
There's an added cost from sequestration, which reduced the federal subsidies for the Build America bonds.
Yes.
It's at $30 million in the coming fiscal year. Will that number grow in out years, or is that about what you expect annually?
It's about what, I think it's about generally what we expect. It may grow a little bit based on changes in our debt service, but it's kind of on the margin.
Now, the subsidy was 35% of the interest cost. Is that a percentage of that 35, or is all of the federal subsidy cut?
No, I mean, with the tax treatment of bonds is not changing. And the Build America bonds remain with just a lesser amount than what was previously
Right, so they were promising 35%.
So this is a cut of the, what, roughly 9% or so?
Are you
LCFF for a second?
Yeah.
So this document says that there were modest changes to it, answering some of the questions that legislators have.
Biggest change is that English language learners will count for purposes of funds from instead of being 5 years to 7 years. The other changes are do 3-year averaging of the data to avoid spikes and auditing of the data. And then concerns have been raised about what would happen with our God, I'm going to use the acronym because I can't remember. Rope providers. It's the folks who are doing training programs and career technical education like programs. And basically, there's a concern about folks who were directly funded were going to lose their funding, and there's a hold harmless, consistent with many of the hold harmlesses that are built into the formula for 2 years. So those are the big changes there. The significant changes in the local control funding formula come in the form of strengthening accountability. And there's stronger accountability mechanisms built into the May revision to ensure that the dollars are being spent in a manner that is for the primary benefit of the students, to make sure that the dollars are being used to improve the outcomes that those students experience, and also that the dollars are, that there's an appropriate role for county superintendents as well as for the state in oversight to ensure that the goals that are intended are accomplished.
Back on healthcare, you guys have revised estimates for Medi-Cal enrollments and the currently eligible but not enrolled and the newly eligible. You had a placeholder number there last time?
Yes, and we modified that number. We went from a placeholder number to a real number in about April, and that number remains at the same level. We see annual cost growing to about $700 million
for a full year.
Yeah, and then we've included in the May revision new numbers are the inclusion of the additional funding for county administration, and the additional dollars associated with the optional expansion, and that's as well as some changes for the state-only programs, particularly for newly qualified immigrant programs and for pregnancy scope.
So for Medi-Cal spending, I mean, given the fact that the bulk of the expansion will be for newly eligible and that the feds pay for, but is there a top-line increase in Medi-Cal spending?
Increase in Medi-Cal spending is $500 million above the governor's budget in terms of...
Above January?
Yes, and that's a couple of different things. We have had a delay in court approval of a court action on the appeal regarding rate reductions, so that's a significant chunk of it. We also had a federal disapproval from a reduction that was included in last year's budget to change the way in which we compensate some public hospitals.
Public hospitals?
Yeah,
right.
It's not the traditional public hospitals. They're called non-designated public hospitals.
Okay.
Anna, in here you mentioned in 2015-16 starting to pay hundreds of millions of dollars more toward employee pensions. Is that something new here in the May revise, or is that some existing
It's,
requirement that you're?
it's something here that's new in the mayor revision, and it's based on the recent PERS action to change their smoothing policies relative to asset losses.
Do you have a number on that?
It's about 300 general fund. It's
300 million
Yeah, it's about
a year?
Yeah, it's about what, 6 total funds, Richard?
Yeah, I'll give that.
Yeah.
Can we get the total dollar amount that will be spent in the coming fiscal year, and how much of that is the increase?
In terms of PERS?
Yeah.
This increase is not happening until a few years out. The first year in which it's going to be phased in is 15-16. So our contributions are going up, but it's kind of modest until we get to the smoothing changes, which are in 15-16.
And on the cap and trade loan,
Yes.
are there repayment provisions to repay that?
Yes, the dollars have to be repaid immediately upon a determination that the program needs the resources for its expenditure plan.
So does that add to the wall of debt?
It would add to the wall of debt, and the deferrals reduce the wall of debt, so the net change on the wall of debt is $258 million.
Just a quick question about the corrections piece and
Yeah.
moving the longer-term offenders from counties back to jail. I mean, what sort of, I mean, do you see this being revenue neutral, and what's?
It would be revenue neutral and population neutral. It's really a question of which offenders are housed in which setting. So counties have raised concerns, particularly our sheriff colleagues have raised concerns about the suitability of handling long-term offenders in jail. So this would provide an opportunity for, if a county wants to have longer-term offenders come to corrections, then we would have shorter-term offenders go to jail, and it would be population neutral and revenue neutral swap of people. It's just a change of who is in what institution.
So what count do you see? I mean, is this in the hundreds, in the thousands?
It depends on, it's the total number of people who are in jail who's higher than, who are there for longer than 5 years is about 1,000. So it depends on how many of those counties decide that they would rather have them be in the state, and then we'd have a like number of people moving in the other direction. So it depends, but the outer bound is, about 1,000.
Prisons have a large number of short-time offenders?
The prisons have people that they were at one time long-term offenders, but they are at the, basically at the release time. So you always have people coming in and out of prison. The other population is you have people who, by the time they come to prison, they've served a substantial amount of their time locally, so they only have a short sentence left in the state. So those are our two categories of shorter-term offenders.
So federal officials won't be looking at this and saying, hey, they're increasing the prison population, because I think someone from CDCR testified to public safety a few weeks ago raising those concerns.
It's population neutral in light of the 3-judge panel and in light of our fiscal condition. So we're trying to provide counties an option, provide counties some relief, but do it in a way that is consistent with where we are on 3-judge panel and where we are in our budget.
Were there any particular types of offenders who you have in mind who are spending, in excess of 5 years in county jail?
Whatever offenders are spending in excess of 5 years that the county wants to send to us.
On the enterprise zone, what is the dollar number that the state would be spending less on enterprise zones if this is approved?
It's the enterprise zone spending would basically be shifted. The entirety of the enterprise zone funds would be shifted to these other expenditures.
Oh, so it'd be 750 million or 700 million?
It'd be the entirety of about 700. Is that a good shorthand for EZs? Yeah. All right. Anything else? Oh, Judy.
Drill this into my head, but I need to. On Medi-Cal expansion, instead of saying taking that $1.5 billion to county for counties, you'll say, hey, we'll take $300 million in the new fiscal year and then ramp it up going forward, so that you'll feel the pain slower over time.
You will experience, our estimate is that you will experience the relief slower, and similarly, the savings will be transferred consistent with the reality of the savings being experienced. So we only have half a year of healthcare reform in this coming year, and we anticipate that enrollment will happen, over time. So the relief will be phased in over time.
Okay.
Anything you'd add?
That, just on the 300 million that in
Yeah.
additional responsibility for the counties, are they, is that?
And shifted responsibility for the counties. I'm sure that's what you meant to say.
Isn't that what I said?
Yes, it is. I think I misheard.
It's what I meant. But is that CalWorks childcare? Is that what that 300 million is?
It's,
for
yeah,
the-
it would be CalWorks and childcare that is linked to CalWorks. So stages 1, 2, and 3. All right. Anything else? All right. Thank you. Thank you.